thank you all for coming. I'm Mark Limshire. I'm running the old Pace Gallery. This is Michael Govin, as you all may know. He runs that little shop over there. And then everybody knows Jarl. Come on, okay. And so we're gonna not do introductions.
Great.
Fantastic. Perfect. Okay. But we're here to talk about Robert Irwin. I'm going to launch right in and I think everybody needs a quick idea about what this show is. Okay, so this show, which is titled Robert Irwin in Los Angeles, is about these incredible years from 1962 to 1971, when Bob made these very few artworks which brought him from abstract expressionism to create an entire new world of art, whether we call it phenomenological art. He wouldn't like us using the terms light and space, but we'd do it anyway. And conditional art, whatever word you had for transforming from the object to the environment. And maybe, Michael, you could maybe give a quick timeline from the line, dot, disc, column.
I'm not going to have exact dates, but I think the evolution is key in the 60s because I don't know if everyone knows Ren Weschler, who's a biographer of Robert Irwin, Seeing is Forgetting, the Thing of the Name One Sees, which is a book that has, I think I am on the back saying it convinces many young people to become artists as Lou Reed did rockers.
You did.
Somehow,
you did.
That book is so inspirational. And Ren would talk about, this timeline from the abstract expressionist period, but of course Bob's abstract expressionist paintings, which he actually got to like at the end, some of them were very specifically to be held by hand. So while they looked abstract expressionist, there was something immediately different about his work because he had this interest in tactility, presence, touching it, and it was so important. Ren always talks about the this transition from the dot, the line, and to the abstraction as something absolutely essential, not just in art history, but in learning. He actually will use an example of kindergarten.
Yes.
In early times, about how this evolution is so almost educational, systematic, to go from this something that you hold in your hand to the nothing that you might not see, like the soft wall where you walk in, and as you said, people would walk into the gallery in 1974, and some people would the elevator would open, they would look and they would see it's empty and leave, and others would walk in for a second and realize something was wrong with one of the walls. And then this phenomena of a fuzzy wall. But that's how minimal, how essential Bob's work could be. When people come to LACMA, a lot of them don't even know unless they read that the Garden of Primal Palm Garden, which is what Bob titled it, is his work of art. We also have a light work. It's called Miracle Mile. It's on view. But this Primal Garden, he said, may I tell that story?
Yeah, tell the story.
LACMA, and then we can go on. We can talk about the past and working with him over many, many, many years. But since it's about LA, he had come to LACMA once when they built the 80s buildings. He says he walked up the stairs, looked at it. These are his words. It was so ugly that if that's what they think of aesthetics, I'm leaving. Walked out and never returned until I invited him back when I took over and said, Bob, you got to help me out here a little. He told me that story. And he said, and he came back 2 weeks later and he pulled out of his back pocket a series of photographs laid them out on the table, and they were all palm trees, palms. And he said, you know, I've never really used palm trees, but it seems like this is the place, LA. And he just described this one moment that tells you everything about the palm tree and the stalk of the palm, the trunk. And he said, you know that silvery stalk, how it holds the sunset. I'd like to ask Yarrow Moan, because he has followed Bob's work. We've had so many discussions about it, but you actually live with one of those columns every day. So you must know even more than we know about them.
Just from admiring it every day. That's all. Not
It does that.
academically or intellectually, but it's really funny, and I don't know if you remember this or not, but this is kind of full circle. The very first conversation you and I had was about Bob Irwin and was about that particular column. When Michael moved to town, David and Suzanne Booth had a dinner party, a very small dinner party for a handful of people, collectors, and I sat next to Michael, and we had just met, and he said, what's your collection? And I was explaining how what he had done at Dia, and particularly Dia Beacon, had really influenced me, and it was my mecca. And so many of the artists and the work that I fell in love with, I discovered and saw for the first time. I'd seen images in books, but the first time I experienced in person was what Michael had created in Beacon. And then, of course, it led to the conversation. He said, well, what are you looking at now? What are you thinking about? I said, you know, I'm looking at a Robert Irwin column. It's 1970. I said, it's one of the tall ones. It says 18 feet tall. And he said, well, what's the problem? Why are you having a hard time deciding? And I had my whole litany of whatever the silly reasons. Michael does 5 minutes, never having seen my collection, but just having heard the description, why it was so important for me to get this thing for my collection. And then without missing a beat, keep in mind, I've known the guy 25 minutes at this point.
He's forcing you to buy an 18-foot tall piece of plexiglass.
Right.
Yeah.
And then he says, and then I think you should gift it to the LA County Museum of Art. And thus began our friendship.
The story we're trying to tell here is that, you know, art really got a license to do something far beyond its traditional purview through Bob's work. And you can study that and you can learn about the impact, but I'm interested in the impact that it had on each of you guys. And what was your first Irwin experience? What did it do to you? How did it change the way you think about art?
And you met him before the purchasing of the column, or was that when you? Yes.
Yes.
You had, right?
So my two experiences. It's actually not the first time I saw his work, because I don't think my eye was as sophisticated as it should have been, and I don't think I was as attuned to what he was doing as I was later as I became educated. But I have my first real impact of seeing a work was the dot paintings floored me. I'd seen the columns, I'd seen some other things, but when I saw, and I think it was at LACMA, I saw a dot painting, and it looked like it was lit from behind. That was my takeaway, and so that was, wow, what's going on here? The other experience was just a personal experience with Irwin, and when I met him the very first time, Mocha had a gala, and we had bought a table, and they asked, would you be willing to have an artist sit at the table with you? I said, oh my God, I'd love that. Are you kidding? That'd be sure. They said, what do you think about Robert Irwin? I said, oh, that's fantastic. I'd love that. Perfect. They obviously know what I like. And so he comes, he sits down, we start talking. He asks, what do you collect? I said, I've been collecting minimalism, but now I've become interested, I know, light and space, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
It's okay.
We're going with
Light and space. And Irwin says to me, well, what do you have of mine? To which I said, there's backstory here, because Pace is involved in this. I said, right now I don't have anything. And Irwin says, well, what kind of collection is that?